Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I will be speaking to you about the essence of the learning health system, trying to give you an idea, or at least my idea, of what this dynamic and very interesting concept is. I must begin with a disclosure that I am proud to serve on the board of directors of the Learning Health Community, which is a nonprofit corporation promoting learning health systems. My talk will be in two major parts. I am going to first address at a high level what learning health systems are. And then I will get into the second part of my talk, which actually answers a question or attempts to answer a question that many people ask me, and that I'm sure you all would be asking me if I did not address it first. You may still have questions about what I present, and in fact, I hope you will. The second part goes to what differentiates the learning health system from other approaches to health improvement. And I'm going to come at this from three directions. They are the embracement of uncertainty, the key concept of infrastructure, and the third idea of the importance of learning communities to what learning health systems are and do. So to begin the definitional journey, I'll offer you a 3.5-line definition that sits at the top of this slide. The idea that health systems at any level of scale become learning health systems when they acquired the ability continuously and routinely to improve health through discovery and implementation. And I'm going to be elaborating in the next few slides on this definition. Let me alert you to the fact at this point that there is a substantial literature on learning health systems, and it exists in a number of places. I'll point to two of them. One is the very large number of books and monographs that have come forward from the Institute of Medicine initially, now the National Academy of Medicine. The IOM back in 2007 originated this idea and have since produced a very large number of excellent monographs that you can download from their website. The second, I will plug the journal creatively entitled Learning Health Systems, which is now entering its 5th year of publication. I have the honor of being the editor of this journal, and I will immodestly say that it contains a rich collection of literature addressing this topic. I would also like to make the point from the very outset that I greatly prefer using the term learning health systems to what is often used and not preferred by me, namely learning health care systems. I think you see where I'm going like this, and I realize I'm speaking to a public health audience, so perhaps the virtue of calling this learning health systems does not even need to be stated. But just to the point, referring to learning healthcare systems seems to imply that what we're trying to improve here is just the process of healthcare, while health, of course, is a much more transcendent concept, bringing in public and population health that is of interest to all of you as well as to me. So I really do encourage us, when we use the LHS abbreviation, use it to refer to learning health systems and not learning healthcare systems. So to give you an idea, perhaps a slightly clearer idea of what a learning health system is about, I'd like to suggest two anthems, or three anthems, which are inspirational and evocative of what the learning health system concept is about. I've been challenged to put these to music, to make them into true musical anthems, but if you are so inclined, I would welcome you to try and send me the score, and I would be happy to give you an award or a reward if we are successful in putting your score to music. The first is to bring us the tough problems. The learning health system really is about taking on what are often called wicked problems, major problems. I don't think the methods of the learning health system are really needed for problems that lend themselves to simple and straightforward solutions. So this really is designed to solve very, very challenging and complex problems. Number two, a system problem needs a system solution. The tough problems are more often than not system problems, and the system problems are not going to be fixed by fixing the people, as is sometimes suggested. In my opinion, people rarely need fixing. We need to fix the larger environment in which they work and the way their work is organized and supported. So our second anthem is a system problem needs a system solution. And as you would judge from its name, the learning health system is a system approach. And the third anthem is 17 years to 17 months, or maybe to 17 weeks to 17 days, and even 17 hours. And this, of course, refers to the well-documented latency between the discovery of new biomedical knowledge and its widespread use in practice. There is controversy around whether the current latency is 17 years or shorter, or maybe longer. There is disagreement about the exact number, but there is certainly agreement around the fact that the latency is years measured in 2 digits. And so that is the third anthem, 17 years to 17 months. Can we, using learning health system methods, shorten this latency? Now, to get a little more specific, I'm going to share with you an idea of what a learning health system is by going to a hypothetical where an inspector is coming into a health system to try to determine to what extent this health system is a learning health system. And I'm going to present you with 5 high-level items that I believe this hypothetical inspector would have on her checklist. The first would be, can this health system capture as data to learn from characteristics, events, and context? What happens in the system? Can this be captured as data to learn from? Is this going on? And we call this data to knowledge. The second is the complementary practice of taking this knowledge and making it available to support decisions and making it rapidly available to support decisions, and we call this knowledge to performance. The third is whether this is an ongoing process, whether this improvement that could result from taking data to knowledge and knowledge to performance or knowledge to practice is something that is continuous and enduring, or is it something that perhaps this entity only does when it is threatened in some way, and then having dealt with that threat goes back to the way it was before? The fourth, and we'll return to this in some detail later, is the presence of an infrastructure that enables these things described above to happen routinely and, very important, with economies of scale. And then finally, I submit to you that this inspector would be looking to see if all of these things going on above are part of the culture. And by this, I mean that if the inspector went around and talked to people and asked why in this system they do these things, maybe they wouldn't even be able to ask the question. Maybe they'd say something like, well, this is just who we are here, and this is what we do. So these are 5 high-level items that would be on an inspector's checklist. To get yet another sense of what a learning health system is, we could make a kind of semi-wordle out of what you saw on the previous slides, pulling out the keywords to give maybe a gestalt of the learning health systems. And these are the keywords I would pick out that together describe this general notion of what a learning health system is. Persons and people, learning, data, knowledge, rapidly available, performance, continuous and enduring, cyclic activity, infrastructure, and culture. We'll return to many of these words later in this presentation. Now, another key point that goes to the systemic nature of learning health systems is that they can exist at any level of scale. Single organizations within their organizational boundaries can function as learning health systems. Networks of organizations can form, often around specific health problems or classes of health problems, to work together across organizational boundaries using the methods of learning health systems to solve problems that perhaps working separately they would not be able to solve. Learning health systems can be defined jurisdictionally. States, provinces, or regions can, within their geographic boundaries or jurisdictional boundaries, become learning health systems. Entire nations can become learning health systems or strive to do so, and what you see here is Switzerland, which as the moment has the only nationally supported and commissioned learning health system initiative in the world, but there are other national initiatives, as I'll describe in a moment. And then perhaps someday we could conceive of the planet as a global learning health system, and certainly COVID-19 has brought about the attractiveness of this idea. So what do learning health systems actually do? The fundamental activity of a learning health system is what might be called community-directed cycles of study and change. And I realize that in presenting this as the fundamental activity of a learning health system, I'm not presenting a new idea. It is an idea with some distinctive features to it, but basically the idea of a learning and improvement cycle goes back approximately 100 years, and it's very important to acknowledge that this is not a fundamentally new idea. The cycle begins with the formation of a community that comes together in pursuit of some defined health problem of interest. The cycle begins by capturing current practice as data. What happens now? And if we do improve against this problem of interest, what measurements will we make to see if anything has improved? The community then would begin to assemble this data into some kind of analyzable form, which is an important step in and of itself. The data collected by the community would be analyzed and converted into some form of knowledge. The results of the analyses would be considered new knowledge, generating new insights into how things may be improved. This would be combined with external evidence, because it is very, very likely that any problem important enough to be of interest to this community would have been studied by others, and the results of those studies could be combined with what was learned locally to generate a set of results that would be interpreted by the community. And if it's decided by the community that something of importance that could point to improvement has been learned, they would proceed to this knowledge to performance component of the learning cycle, where an intervention or interventions would be designed. This might be one intervention. It might be more than one intervention, which might be tried simultaneously as a kind of experiment in implementation. Then these interventions would be implemented, action would be taken. This would result in a changed system and lead into the first iteration, the beginning of the second iteration of the cycle, where the new state of the system would be captured as data. Measurements would be taken as to whether improvement resulted, and perhaps the changes would be studied in juxtaposition with improvements to see what specific actions were associated with improvements or otherwise. And this would initiate the second stage of the cycle that would lead to further improvement as the cycle progressed. So let's just take a simple example to illustrate how this might work. I use as illustration the universally appreciated problem of preventing falls in nursing homes. And we will begin this illustration of the cycle with the formation of the learning community. This would be a group of people, a multi-stakeholder group of people interested in solving this problem or addressing this problem or improving against this problem. And the nursing homes involved could be a set of nursing homes in one state or region. It could be a set of nursing homes owned by a particular company. It could be a self-organizing group of nursing homes that just agreed to come together and work together to address this problem. They would then capture current practices data, most notably what happens now, what do we do now to prevent falls in nursing homes, and what is the fall rate and severity? That's our metric of success against which the progress of the learning cycle could be measured. Then the data would be assembled from all participating nursing homes, not homes, I'm sorry, and would be put in an analyzable form. The analysis would associate practices with lower or higher fall rates. And this would be a kind of knowledge generated by the group that would be integrated with external evidence. And certainly this topic has been studied in many ways in many places. And this combination of locally and externally produced evidence would be then interpreted by the community. What have we learned? What do we think we might want to change? What interventions are indicated? Then the intervention would be designed, who would receive it, how would it be implemented, and do we want to do an experiment? Do we want to do this more than one way to see what might work better? Then action would be taken that would change current practice in whole or in part, and this would bring us around to the change system. Okay, we've changed. What happens now? How are we doing things now? And what is the fall rate and severity? Have things improved? And this would not be an end in itself. This would be the beginning of the second stage or the second iteration of the learning cycle, which would then continue from there. I want to point out the importance of the continuity of the presence of the learning community in the learning cycle. And this is a key feature that I want to emphasize. The community that discovers is also the community that implements. So better health can be seen as resulting from the successive progress from P to D to D to K to P to D, and so forth, all under the aegis of a single persistent learning community. So what this adds up to is that better health in the vision of the learning health system requires these complete cycles, and not what many of us, myself included, were taught and trained to do in preparation for our academic careers, and frankly, what we did or what I did for most of my academic career. I would collect data, analyze it, convert it to knowledge, publish that in a journal, after which I would go on and collect new data, repeating that process, converting it to knowledge and publishing another article, and so on and so forth. Doing this under the assumption that there is somebody waiting to continue this cycle and take what I published into some kind of change in practice or performance. But in my opinion, and the data would bear this out, too often there is nobody there to catch this right away. Nothing to ensure the continuity of this process. And this, in large part, at least in my view, accounts for the many-year latency between new knowledge and its application to practice. Another thing we want to avoid as we think about how learning cycles might work is what might be called the open circuit problem. And we see this in a lot of institutions where they do the D to K process, and they also have something in place to execute the K to P part of the process, but there's a gap here. because instead of using a continuously functioning learning community, there's a group of people who do the D to K, the quote unquote researchers, and a different group of people who do the K to P, the implementers. And what often happens in these situations is that there's a disconnect here, and the handoff between the D to K people and the K to P people is not a smooth one. And the implementation of these new ideas, if it happens at all, does not happen in an optimal way. So a key feature of learning health systems is that continuing presence of the learning community to ensure that this circuit gets closed and there is no gap. To bring this part of the talk to a close, I can share with you a number of examples of learning health system initiatives ongoing at all levels of scale, perhaps only accepting the global level. There are institutions in the United States that I would offer as achieving the status of learning health systems as they presently exist, or strongly striving to do so, and the 5 institutions here are illustrative of that. In the US, networks are growing faster than anybody can keep track of them. I can just point out a number of networks that have been spawned through the PCORI effort. The most notable one is Improve Care Now, that I will talk about in a moment. PedsNet, another network, Cancer Link by the American Society for Clinical Oncology, and the first NIH-sponsored learning health system specific network that I know of, the EpiNet network for early psychosis intervention that has been funded through the NIMH. We have some examples of state and provincial learning health systems in the US and Canada. The nations I would single out, in addition to Switzerland, which I mentioned earlier, are Scotland and England within the UK. And I know of incipient efforts ongoing in Saudi Arabia and Taiwan, and there were probably other efforts that I am not directly aware of. The planet someday. And just as an illustration to close this, here is described the UK Better Care Partnership being run through the Health Data Research UK initiative. And what you see here is their version, and there are several versions of the learning health system loop, what they call the Better Care loop, that they are implementing on a nationwide basis in the UK. So going on to the second part of my talk, here I'm going to address what makes the LHS approach to health improvement different from other approaches. And I'm going to begin with this idea of embraced uncertainty. I've already mentioned that system problems are complex problems, and a key aspect of the learning health system approach is the assumption that at the outset of a learning cycle, the community is unsure of what is the best thing to do, and more specifically, what it is going to do. So at every stage of the learning cycle, inquisitiveness is at the front. There are open questions at each stage. In P to D, what's happening now? In D to K is how should we change? And K to P, how should these changes be implemented? So this idea in a nutshell is that in a learning health system approach, the problem you're trying to solve is a tough problem, and really you don't know what you're going to do when you embark on this journey. It follows that the learning cycle must start here at 5 o'clock and not up here at 12 o'clock. If you start at 12 o'clock, basically the community has been told what to do or has made what I would call an evidence-based decision, where we're starting up here and we're ready to implement something because we've decided on what to do. If you start at 5 o'clock, the community collaboratively discovers what to do on the assumption that on the outset, what you are going to do is not known. And here are just different ways the work of the learning community might be phrased. If you start at 12 o'clock, you might base this on advice from consultants who have convinced the leadership that the following changes should be implemented to reduce falls. That's the cycle beginning here. Starting at 5 o'clock, you might say leadership is concerned about the rate of falls. Based on your own experience in the literature, develop and implement a plan. That is more of a learning health system approach, beginning the cycle at 5 o'clock. Now, moving on to infrastructure and this idea of shared services. So if I've convinced you that these learning cycles can enable improvement, I must also state that they do not, as a cluster, create a learning system. And to understand this, it's useful to go to the basic idea of what an infrastructure is. We tend to take infrastructures for granted, and to unveil what the fundamental nature of an infrastructure is, consider a city that has a lot of water in it, like Providence, Rhode Island. And if you want to get large numbers of people per day across a river, there are a couple of ways of doing it. You can give each family a hammer, a nail, some wood, a few nails, some wood, paint, tar, a few other things, and say, build your own rowboat and row yourself across. On the other hand, you can build a bridge that everybody can use, and clearly the bridge is an infrastructural, and everybody having their own rowboats, a kind of counter infrastructural approach. So we can apply this concept to the learning health system and envision a learning health system as a collection of cycles, all supported by a common infrastructure, providing services to all of the learning cycles that are shared by those carrying out those cycles, by the learning communities carrying out those cycles. And here you see this somewhat abstractly, but I think usefully illustrated. We show here 5 learning cycles going on at the same time, some cycling more rapidly, others cycling more slowly, but each addressing a different health problem under the aegis of its own learning community. The ring underneath all of these learning cycles comprises what might be called a socio-technical infrastructure, an infrastructure consisting not just of technology, but also of people, policies, and processes that in combination provide services that can benefit all of the cycles. And why does this work? This works because even though each cycle is addressing a different problem, they are all doing basically the same thing. The green P to D, the blue D to K, and the red K back to P. And because they're all doing the same things, a common set of services or a shared set of services can support them all. So why is this important? Well, it's important because if there is no platform supporting all of these cycles, there's no economy of scale. Each one requires its own agreements, technology, staffing, analytics, dissemination mechanisms, and so forth, such that the cost of 10 cycles will be exactly 10 times the cost of doing one. And doing the next one will be just as expensive as doing the one before. But with this platform, this infrastructure, supporting all of the cycles, there's big economy of scale. The cost of doing 10 cycles will be much, much less than 10 times the cost of one, and it will be relatively inexpensive to do the next one. I really think this emphasis on infrastructure is a key differentiator of learning health systems that, based on my own experience, and we can talk about this, really differentiates the learning health system from lean, PDSA and PDCA cycles, which are very closely related to the learning cycle as I described it, but putting an infrastructure under a set of them creates a different approach. And it also differentiates the LHS from proprietary quality approaches of various sorts. So very crudely, you can think of a learning health system as cycles plus infrastructure, plus other things, but I'm emphasizing infrastructure now. And I'd also like to emphasize that open infrastructure, in other words, infrastructural components that can be shared across learning health systems, can allow them to scale up and come into being at far less cost and with much less effort than would otherwise be necessary if each learning health system had to build its own infrastructure. And I'm very much hoping that things will head in this direction. So what does this infrastructure consist of? To see this, let's look from the top down into this diagram that I have shown you before. And if you look from the top down, what you see is the learning cycles and the ring. And what we can do, and I won't dwell on this in great detail, is elaborate the infrastructural ring with 8 very specific services that can be provided to all learning cycles, that each of which aligns with a particular stage of the cycle that corresponds to where it is arrayed on the ring. One example would be the formation of the learning community, which takes place here on the learning cycle. And the supportive infrastructure would be a assembly of techniques and methods informing how to organize, start, maintain, and support learning communities. In this way, by sharing this knowledge, it is possible that every learning cycle starting up does not have to figure out how to do this, but can use the knowledge that exists, the infrastructural knowledge that exists, and incorporate that into its activity without having to invent it. Now, the good news is that many open infrastructure components already exist. So as we think about very, very large-scale learning health systems, we can think about infrastructural components, most of them right now focusing on the data to knowledge side, but some focusing on other stages because they are open resources to be available to new learning health systems that are starting up. And I think this is a very important and optimistic story about the future of learning health systems at large scale, at the scale of states, provinces, nations, and the world. My third point about the learning health system approach and what differentiates it is a further investigation of this concept of learning communities. This is so important because the learning health system is a collaborative socio-technical system using that socio-technical infrastructure that I described earlier. And these learning communities ensure that the way the system operates will be all-inclusive, will be trusted. The work it does needs to be trusted at many, many different levels. And I often argue that trust is the glue that holds learning health systems together. Learning health systems work best when they're decentralized. This is very much consistent with the ideas I described earlier of starting at 5 o'clock and figuring out what to do rather than being told what to do. Learning health systems are reciprocal in the sense that everybody puts something in and everybody gets something out. And I also believe that these systems work best when they are driven by the shared passion and curiosity of the participants in these learning communities. So it follows that if you really want to achieve the effective operation of these learning cycles, you can't skip this beginning step of forming these learning communities. And once they are formed, keeping them active across the entire learning cycle so that you don't have the open circuit problem I described before, among others. So these learning communities are collaboratives, as I said before. They're multi-stakeholder, they pursue a shared goal. They're fueled by passion to achieve this goal. The people who participate in these learning communities, because the community is focused on an important, wicked health problem, are motivated to the point of being passionate about solving this problem. They work together to co-produce strategies. Co-production is a key concept in the operation of learning communities. The leaders are facilitative, and it's very important that all groups participate in a complementary and co-equal way in the operation of the learning community. I've been very impressed by the work of Peter Margolis and his colleagues at Cincinnati Children's Hospital with the work they've done under the rubric of Improved Care Now, which has actually spawned multiple learning communities in pursuit of very, very significant health problems. I strongly encourage you to go to their website and also to watch their video, which is very inspirational, that I don't have the time to show you today. But I can illustrate the value and of some of the work that Improved Care Now has done. Here is an illustration of their abilities and success to increase the remission rate for adolescents and young adults with inflammatory bowel disease from something approximating 50% to something approaching 80% over 9 or 10 years of work. And I believe this is very emblematic of the kinds of improvements that can result using learning health system methods. In Michigan, at our university and in our state, we are working now on an extremely wicked problem, which is survival from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. As you can see, the survival rate is sitting between 8 and 11% for cardiac arrests, and we have formed, and about a year ago, a out-of-hospital cardiac arrest learning community, initially at the scale of 2 counties, and with stakeholders who have been enthusiastically participating across the whole, what the American Heart Association describes as the chain of survival for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. We are pleased that this work has been recognized by and is now funded by the American Heart Association. And I'm showing you here some pictures of the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest learning community. You can see the participatory nature of this, a picture being worth 1,000 words, truly. And you can also see the multi-stakeholder nature of the learning community from the appearance of the people in the pictures. The lower right picture is a cardiologist, our survivor, the older of the 2 women, and the daughter of the survivor. Survivors and the families of sadly non-survivors are key members of our learning community. So this brings me pretty much to a close. To give you a quick summary, learning health systems can be thought about through their marriage of discovery with implementation in these complete cycles, P to D, D to K, K to P, P to D, and onward, as a way to engender improvement against very, very challenging health problems. And to my second point, learning health systems are different. They embrace uncertainty with discovery at all stages of the cycle. They use an infrastructural approach with services shared by multiple cycles. It's an approach that can be characterized as using bridges and not rowboats. And third differentiator is this idea of learning communities, where the people who discover also put these discoveries into practice, this notion of continuity, which is essential to the improvement process. I'll close with pointing out a few publications that are really fundamental to the talk you just heard, and by no means the whole story on learning health systems, but the paper on the top advances the general conception of the learning health system that you just heard. The paper in the middle describes this important notion of combining external evidence with internal evidence in learning cycles. And finally, putting in a shameless plug for our journal, I believe your understanding of learning health systems will be enlightened by perusing the many articles that have now been published in this journal. So thank you very much. Please write to me if I can't get to your questions in the ensuing discussion. I can assure you that if you write to me, you will hear back from me. Thank you very much.